we heard the enthusiasm of those outside the courthouse.
Yeah, what an absolutely historic day. We've been out and about meeting with petitioners in the case, meeting with members of the community who'd gathered outside the Supreme Court. Those who were inside that courtroom described a mood of excitement and optimism, and eventually a courtroom packed full of emotion as those justices began reading out their verdicts. People were crying and hugging each other. Outside, people told us they felt like their dignity had been restored, that they could now legitimately file complaints with the police if they're attacked for being homosexual. They can argue with landlords who refuse to rent apartments to homosexuals. They can take on employers who discriminate on the basis of sexuality. So really a mood of empowerment all around, but also recognition that while this verdict is being widely celebrated across Indian cities, it will take a long time to trickle down to the country's rural areas. 70% of India's population lives in small towns and villages, and it's going to take a long time for societal changes, for attitudes to change in those places. And we also spoke with people who weren't very happy about this judgment. People said this is against Indian tradition, it's against Indian culture, it'll be absolutely unacceptable back in their villages. So really mixed emotions, but on the whole, really a great historic landmark verdict.
And there's been a legal ping pong in past years. It was struck down in 2009, reinstated in 2013. This time, you've got a unanimous ruling.
Yes, the justices seemed very aware of the position they're occupying in history. Their judgments were remarkably progressive. They quoted Oscar Wilde, Leonard Cohen, who said, "From the ashes of the gay, democracy is coming." They quoted Goethe, who said, "Take me as I am." So really, they seemed aware of this fact. The Chief Justice of India, who was part of that panel, said that Section 377 was irrational, indefensible, and just manifestly arbitrary, and we have to bid adieu to prejudice and empower all citizens. I think one of the most emotional moments in the courtroom was when one of the justices said that history owes an apology to members of the community for the delay in ensuring their rights. Another really symbolic moment was when the judges accepted that up to 8% of India's population, that's nearly 104 million people, are members of the LGBTQ community. That's one of the world's largest such populations. And I can't tell you how important that is, that we have a number now. For so many years, there were no surveys on how many people belong to this community. So really, the judges were aware that they're making history, and it's just a remarkably progressive verdict.
Yeah, Mandakini, you're talking about sort of the tide of history and the ruling BJP party of Narendra Modi says it backs the measure, although some members of that party were against it. In neighboring states, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, there are those pointing to today's landmark ruling where you are and saying it's time for the laws to be struck from the books where they are as well. But what is the trend when it comes to whether or not India is becoming more socially progressive or conservative?
Look, this particular verdict was decades in the making. Some of those petitioners have been in and out of courts for nearly 3 decades now. And as some of them told us earlier today, this is merely the first step in a long battle. Many members of the community intend to go back to the courts to ask for legalization of gay marriages, to ask for laws to be laid down for regulating adoptions by gay parents. So there's still a very long way to go, but it's hard to deny that this is extremely symbolic, and it's going to have a huge impact. The judges, in fact, said that what this means is that constitutionally, all members of the LGBT community have the same rights as any other citizen in India, and that means a lot to people who've been ostracized since independence.
Mandakini